Thank you for tuning in to another episode of my Veterans to Success podcast. You probably know by now, my mission is to help 1 million veterans and entrepreneur business owners achieve the dreams, goals, and aspirations they deserve. That is why I created the Veterans to Success podcast, because I get to interview guys, men and women, who want to share their fascinating stories with you about their time before, during and after their time in the military, so you can benefit and overcome your challenges. So sit back, relax, and get ready to be mesmerized, astounded, and entertained. Hello and welcome to another episode of Veterans to Success, the podcast where I get to speak with seemingly ordinary people with extraordinary stories. And today I've got with me Valerie Orman. Hello, Val. How are you?
Hi, Joe. I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. And you could probably detect that it's not a British accent you've got there. So, yeah, you come across, you're one of our comrades from across the pond. So whereabouts in America are you talking from today?
I'm from a little town called Bowie, Maryland, which is nestled between a bigger town called Washington, D.C., that's been in the news a lot lately, and Annapolis, Maryland, which is historic and named for your former queen, and Baltimore, which is also rather historic. So I'm sort of in the triangle, right in the middle there. So it's a great place to live. I live a little bit in the country, which is nice. I'm not down in the city, but I am close enough to go and enjoy the sights and sounds.
Well, thank you very much for that geography lesson. I know exactly where you are. That's great. And yeah, there is quite a bit going on over that stateside, isn't there, really?
Yeah.
We're not here to talk about politics, though, because what we're going to be talking about is your fantastic career. And, you know, there's no big fanfare for the common man, for the common woman. And we just dive straight in, and as we go along and you tell your story, it's a steady reveal, so there's no big introduction, right? So that's okay with you, isn't it, Val?
Oh, that's fine. That's great. I prefer it that way. I can't stand sitting and listening to my biography.
Well, so you know what was going on, because none of us are born to join the military, are we? So I just want to get a sort of feel for the makeup of what makes Valerie Orman. What were you doing as a young girl?
All right. I grew up in Bowie. I happened to be I lived here, and I went away for many years in the Navy and ended up coming back here. And it was a pretty typical early 60s town, or Levittown, you may have heard of, where they were building a lot of houses that looked alike, and it was really to settle people to work here after the war, after World War II, to help filled Washington, D.C. These people needed a place to live. So it was a kind of middle-class neighborhood, a lower middle class maybe. And it was great because we weren't rich, we weren't poor. And I grew up with kids that, you know, one person's a construction person and one person works in the State Department. And so we had a real variety. And because there was a lot of military in the area, a lot of the kids that I went to school with, they were here and gone, and they were from all over. I mean, we had kids from pretty exotic places like Indonesia, you know.
Yeah.
So it was a really fun place to grow up. And but as far as what got me interested in the military was my family. So you did notice my accent, that it is not British. However, my mother was born a dual citizen. Her father was in the British Navy and then transferred to the American Navy to marry my grandmother, my mother's mother. So my mother was a dual citizen up until she was 18, and then she had to make the choice. Well, she had been in Bermuda till she was about 6 and then lived in New York the next 12 years. So to her, and she had never been to the UK. So to her, the choice was pretty obvious. And so that's on my mother's side, that's that connection. And also her father's father had been in the British Army during
Wow.
during World War One. And on my father's side, my dad had been in the Navy. He was in the Navy when I was born, and then he ended up staying in the reserves, and then he worked for the Department of the Navy as a civilian. And my uncle was in the Navy. So I had a lot of military influences, although I didn't make that decision until after I was out of college.
Yeah.
I made the choice to go in the Navy.
And
So.
you mentioned it, so it's obviously steeped in history, and there's a big naval connection there, and army actually, British Navy and British Army. Now you mentioned a region which has always fascinated me, and it fascinates me because sometimes it holds a threat to vessels, navy or otherwise, and also aircraft. It's the Bermuda Triangle. What's
Mhm.
all that about, and what stories have you got about that?
I actually don't have any. I've never even been there. My mother, like I said, she left when she was 6.
Right.
So and when I was in the Navy, I was stationed. I was in the Navy for 25 years. I know we'll get to that, but I most people in the American Navy, not all, but a lot of them, they're either East Coast Navy or they're West Coast Navy.
Yeah.
So they're mostly based out of Norfolk or they're mostly based out of California, Hawaii. And I was the Pacific Navy. So I was not stationed in Bermuda, and they closed Bermuda, the U.S. naval base there. I don't know. It was while I was in, but I never had a chance to go there or stay there.
Right.
But I still have distant relatives there, so I do have a visit planned in the future. Just haven't gotten there yet.
Right. Well, just make sure you stay away from the triangle, wherever that is, when you go there. Right now, there's a building in America that is named after the shape, isn't there? If that's not too cryptic, because that's where your father worked, isn't it? That's where your
Oh,
dad
that
worked.
one. Yes, yeah, the
Yeah,
Pentagon. Yes, yeah. My
Pentagon.
father, my
Yeah.
father was there for a long time. I think he was there for over 25 years. So,
And
uh,
how did that go? Because that's pretty hush hush in parts, isn't it?
well, he was. Both my parents were really brilliant. And my mother also worked for the government, and so he. Well, he worked mostly in planning, which is he was not really in the intelligence side of business. It was more in, okay, this is how my father described it. It was a constant flow of what happens if we win $1 million? What happens if we lose our wallet? So just basically making plans for the best case and worst case scenarios for
Right.
strategies and war plans and that kind of thing. So that's what he did. But he didn't talk to us much about that when we were kids because uh, we just asked him, "What do you do at the Pentagon?" He'd say, "It's you don't want to know. It's boring." So of course later on, when I ended up in the Navy, it became much more interesting, and he did share a lot more of what he did with me at that point because it became relevant.
Yeah, yeah, and it's national security, of course.
hmm hmm
And so what prompted you, right? Because obviously you're influenced, heavily influenced by your genes, the historic line, the family line, and your parents. What was it that prompted you to join the military, the Navy in particular, and what was going on in your life at that time?
Well, this isn't going to sound like a very veterans to success story, but it's my story, so I'll tell
Yeah,
it.
yeah, please do.
After I graduated from college, I had a double degree in English and mass communication. So I was off. I graduated when I was 21, and I had an opportunity to go out to San Francisco with a friend, and I'd never been to California, and I'd never been to San Francisco. So I went out there and fell in love with San Francisco. And I was supposed to be there for 2 weeks and ended up staying for a year and a half. So, so
Wow.
while I was out there, I had a job as a bartender, I had a job as a travel agent, and then I went to the state employment office in California and said, "Hey, I've got these 2 degrees, and I can, I'd like to do something a little, a little more stable and whatever." And the woman behind the desk asked me how many words I could type a minute, and I said about 40, which I could. And she said, "Well, we don't have anything for you here." And this was 1980, 84, right?
Right.
Yes, 84 by then. And and I was kind of flabbergasted because I had had good grades. I had, I had always worked. I mean, I'd always been able to find a job. My parents were both New Yorkers, and they're very much influenced those decisions too. And I wanted to work. So to be told that I really was useless, even with 2 degrees, I was a bit dejected, and was walking down the street on the way home down Market Street in San Francisco. And there was one of those sandwich boards out on the sidewalk that said, you know, it was a recruiting office. And so it was a join the Navy, see the world. And
I was
so,
going to say, did they have the same sort of promotional stuff as join the army or navy, see the world, have a great time, meet lots of people, and all the rest? Yeah,
be all you can be.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
not just a job, it's an adventure. I think it may have been, I think it was sort of both of those slogans at the time for the Navy.
yeah.
But I walked in there, and, I knew I had this Navy influence. And I didn't mention that my father's father had been in the Army, U.S. Army, and he had fought during World War One. So I mean, I did have this kind of background that it wasn't such a far-fetched idea. But I walked in, and the first person I talked to, he was in civilian clothes, like we are. And he said, "Oh, here you go. You can take the test." And so I did, and I ended up doing really well on it. And they said, "Okay, you can do whatever you want to do." And I said, "Okay, great." And he said, "Well, sign here." And I said, "Well, wait a minute. I need to make a couple phone calls." And so I went home and told my dad. I said, "Guess what? I'm joining the Marines," because the guy in civilian clothes happened to be a Marine. And I wasn't too particular. I just wanted to do something other than be a bartender and work
Yeah,
at a
just
travel
get me
agency.
in. Yeah.
Yeah. So my dad said, "Officer or enlisted?" And I said, "What?" So he straightened me out and said, "Listen, you have 2 degrees. You really you need to be an officer, and your family, and my uncle was still in the Navy at the time. My dad wasn't. My uncle was a captain in the Navy at the time." And he said, "Let me call Uncle George and see, well, what we can do here." So anyhow, they ended up getting me retracked into the office fortunately, before I'd signed the dotted line,
Right.
and I ended up going into officer candidate school. So I went that route through Newport, Rhode Island, just like my father had. And
Oh,
so,
wow.
yeah, so it turned out to be a rocky road in, but a great outcome. And I, at that point too, I'd been out of college for a few years, and so I really understood what it was like. And this is again in the '80s, and the workplace was pretty tough, and it was, and so I didn't take it for granted where I was, and the
Yeah.
opportunity I had. So,
And it's always interesting. Well, it is for me anyway. I find that I learn a lot more when I have a rocky road or a bit of a failure, because that's where I have to really step up to get over it. How do
mhm.
you find rocky roads treat you lessons?
I think the lessons are, I think you pretty kind of said it. They're more poignant. They're more, they're, you learn that you say, "I'm not going to do that again."
Yeah,
I'm,
yeah,
I'm, I'm going to ask some better questions. The, the things that I did when I was in San Francisco, I was just, I was living in a different state. I was enjoying life,
yeah,
and
yeah,
but the lessons learned were, being a bartender in downtown San Francisco at 21 is not really it's not an easy job. And I did learn some lessons there that I said,
yeah.
okay, it's not all glamour. It's not as glamorous as it looks. It's nothing like Cheers. And but you also learn to value also coworkers, and so camaraderie,
Yeah.
that people who aren't going to stab you in the back, and so many things you learn in the military that you can compare and contrast. So
Yes.
yeah.
And I mean, so this is back in the 80s, right? And I
Mhm.
can remember that because I joined just before you. I joined in 81. And I know, right, I've never experienced it personally, so I can't speak from experience because I'm a male, right? In the 80s, being a female, I mean, obviously you've got the gender difference, male, female.
Mhm.
Now, being a male and being a female now has changed a lot to when it was back in the 80s. How was your? Because I guess there weren't that many females either when you
Right.
joined. So how did that affect your training? What was the divide, if any, and how did it affect your psyche and the way you approach things?
Yeah, it was a very interesting time because during the early 80s, the Navy realized that it had a certain number of women, but it had a very small number of women officers.
Yeah.
So they were looking hard for women officers at the time. So that worked in my favor because
Yeah.
they needed women officers in order to get the numbers a little more equal. I mean, they would
Mm.
never be equal, but if you have, let's say they had 10% women in the Navy and 2% of them were officers. So it
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
trying to get that a little more evened out. So because of this, when I went to my officer candidate school class, it had the largest number of women than any other class had had
Uh,
in a combined class. So at this point, they were no longer at separating the men and the women. So we were all in that training together. But there were a lot of women.
yeah.
So that was good. Also, a lot of the women that were there, because they were trying hard to get them from here and there and everywhere, we had a lot of enlisted women. So, prior enlisted women. So they came in and they knew what was going on. They weren't like us with the deer in the headlights. They knew, okay, at some point this guy is going to stop screaming. Some of the rest of us are like, oh, did we make a big mistake here? So anyhow, so that was very helpful. There were I, there were those who still didn't believe we belonged there. And I can honestly say, I think up until the time I retired in 2009, there are those, and I still know that there are those who don't think that we belong there. But the ones who didn't see it that way far outnumbered those
Yeah.
people. So at
I,
least the way
oh,
they
go on.
treated us. Yeah.
Because what? Sorry.
No, I said at least the way they treated us. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
it was, yeah.
Now, the reason, sorry for cutting across you. I just thought of something then. But, and it's great that the majority were okay, and the ones that weren't were probably dinosaurs. The reason I thought about a dinosaur and then I contradicted my thought process, because I could understand or appreciate that if you had dinosaurs between say 1982 and 1992, then that would be a finite period. But from what you say, then you went on to say there are still some of those characters in now. So it must be a genetic thing or something where it's passed down and those dinosaurs still remain. What do you think causes that?
I don't know. I I really don't, because I was not raised that way. I
Yeah,
was raised by a family that said you can do anything. My brother, you can each do whatever you want to do, and equality and all that. So I don't know. I do think that sometimes there are situations where people feel threatened by women that somehow, and this is in the military I'm talking about,
yeah, yeah,
where they feel like that they can get away with something that as a man they may not, or that, and I do know this because I was a victim of this, that and that uh people think you're getting preferential treatment so that they speak poorly about you, or your performance, or what your expected performance is going to be before you even show up. And so and so I don't know if that's a a coping mechanism for some of these people that have a problems, or if they've just worked with women who really were competent. I mean, this not just in the military, but anywhere, or
mm,
yeah. So so I don't have an answer to that. I just know that I tried not to go into anywhere with preconceived notions, like walk in a room and think that just because I'm the only woman in the room, that every man in here doesn't like me immediately.
yeah,
Just, I don't think like that. So I try not to. And if somebody had an issue with me about something, I would confront them. I mean, not in a confrontational way. I just say, like, well, who told you that, or why would you think that? And the same thing with, I had girlfriends that people would say things about, and I would say, have you ever worked with her?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And if you haven't, then how can you make that statement? So So just that kind of thing. And like I said, there's ways to deal with people without being confrontational,
Yeah, yeah.
but also not glossing over it and pretending like it's not important.
Yeah, because there's clever ways to challenge people.
Hmm.
I mean, I remember recently someone in the conversation, it was clear to me, and I did it without realizing until I reflected on it afterwards when my wife was speaking to me. And there was a situation where someone was questioning someone, and I said, "Oh, well, look, that's really good that they do that because," and then that just nipped it in the bud. Do you know what I mean? Because if you start feeding them, oh yeah, and I thought that as well, and yeah, they can't do that, can they? And then it
Yeah.
just sort of snowballs, doesn't it?
Hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. Take care of it right away. And they tell us that all the time in the military, or told us that, that, yeah. And I had a boss. I was very fortunate. I had a lot of great bosses and great mentors. And I had one at the time. I was a Lieutenant JG, which is a O2 in the Navy. So this is my like second job. And I was in charge of this event, and something wasn't going right. Like the numbers that they wanted weren't getting there, and I don't remember what it was. It's a long time ago, but I went to him directly and I said, well, I went to my boss. My boss says, yeah, you better brief the big boss.
All right, okay.
Roger. So I went to him and I said, "Hey, look, I got to tell you this. Whatever this. I think it was that they were expecting this huge attendance, and it was the numbers were just dwindling in."
Yeah,
And I said, "And I know you're expecting this, this to be a big event." And he said, "Well, thank you for telling me." So I didn't know which way this was going to go. I didn't know if he'd say like, "Get the heck out of here," and I don't come back.
or words to that effect.
Yeah, yeah, or fix it. Why are you coming to me with this? He was a two-star, I was a O2.
Right.
But no, he said, "Thank you so much for bringing this to me." He said, "And I'm going to tell you something right now. I don't ever want you to forget." And he said, "That is, bring me a problem while I can still fix it.
Yeah,
Don't wait till it's too big for me to be able to, weigh in and do something about it." And I said, Roger, and
yeah,
that stuck with me from '02 on, that yeah, it's not always comfortable, and you can worry about what your boss is going to think of you and maybe think that it's somehow your fault. But he did. He just got on the horn and called this person and that person, and got people together, and I re-advertised, and everything came out just fine. But it's because I told him 2 months ahead of the
yeah,
event, not the night before.
yeah. And so tell me while I can still influence the result. Yeah,
Yeah,
that makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah.
So what was so that was a valuable lesson that you learned and discovered and took on board. What was happening with your Navy career then? Because you've been in a few years at this time. Uh, and what was the next stage for you?
Okay. I started, and we talked about this briefly, because about back when they decided they needed all these women in the Navy to be officers, there was still a lot of combat exclusion. There was not, women could not go on every ship. Women could not go on most ships. There was very few slots in naval aviation. There was some in supply, but they carved out a bunch of these jobs that sort of anybody could do that didn't require these war fighting capabilities, and called them the General Unrestricted Line. So that
Yeah.
acronym is GURL, GURL.
And someone stayed up quite a few nights without sleep to think of that one, didn't they?
I'm sure. And there's probably still laughing about it if they're still around. So, and that was where a lot of the women got lumped into. So, my degree, as I said, was in English and mass communication. So I went to my recruiter eventually when I got to the right one, and said, I want to be a public affairs officer, because I knew there was such a thing. And he said, okay, well, when you get to officer candidate school, you just tell them that and they'll make you a public affairs officer. Well, that wasn't the case. That was made a GURL, which means you could kind of end up in anything. And so my first job, I was worked in, it was called manpower management. And what it was is going from organization to organization, conducting efficiency reviews. So it was based on industrial management skills, and the Navy School of Work Study, and and I was just horrified. This was not the join the Navy, see the world job that I thought it was going to be,
Oh, what a surprise.
yeah, yeah, or it wasn't public affairs where I had experience and I'm writing and all the things I wanted to do. It was nothing like that. However, I tell this story because I was only there for 2 years. The organization opened and closed in 2 years. The article that came out was organization is so efficient it shuts itself down. So, but I did get to I really got to travel a lot, and I got to do because some of the studies that we did, one was at a missile range, so I got to fly in helicopters and watch things get blown up, and I got to go to port operations and be on a tug when it's pulling in the big ships, and got to work on go near the small boats that go on the
So
small boat.
you really did roll your sleeves up.
Yeah, yeah, it was really interesting, and it's all stuff I never would have done. But also, we were there to try to make all these organizations more efficient. So because we had the training, we go and say, okay, well, how can we make this process more efficient, and how can we crunch down this organization? Or, every layer does not need a deputy, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it helped me throughout my career because it just gave me a different way of looking at everything. So even to this day, when I do things, I'm going, there has to be a better way to do this. And so it's funny how these skills that you would never even think that you were going to get really can transfer. So I went from that job and ended up going to, I was in Korea for a year, and I worked in public affairs there and had a great job. I had a great boss. I had an Army civilian boss, and I was the deputy chief of public information. And again, this is like I was at O2, but I got to take people up to the DMZ all the time. I got to go to international talks. I got to bring a whole Korean delegation of reporters back to Washington, D.C. and meet the Minister of Defense. I'm not our Minister of Defense. Why am I drawing a blank? Secretary of Defense.
Right.
You guys
Okay.
are
Yeah. Got
Minister of
you.
Defense. So it was fascinating. But that was only a 1 year tour, and then I ended up going to another public affairs job as a GURL in Navy Recruiting Command, which is where I had that boss that taught me that valuable lesson. At that point, though, I was like, oh, boy, this just isn't turning out to be what I thought it was going to be. And I had originally joined the Navy to come in, get a couple years of experience, 5 years of experience, and then go off and do things in the civilian world. But that same boss, I made the mistake of telling his aide that I was thinking about getting out, and his aide told him. So he called me in and said, "Why are you getting out?" I said, I don't really want to be a public affairs officer." And he said, "Well, there's a lot of other things you can do in the Navy." And I really hadn't
Well,
thought
not
about that.
according to girl, there's not.
Yeah, yeah. So I ended up being able to transfer to be an intelligence officer. And that is something that had always interested me. And so maybe because I grew up reading Nancy Drew books and, Ian Fleming or whatever, but
Yeah.
I was fascinated by it. And I, I sort of had some of the right skills because I was analytical. I was a writer, and anyhow, I went to a master's program for strategic intelligence, and then worked in intelligence for the rest of my career. And it was a good switch, and I stuck with it, so it was the right switch. And sometimes it just takes one person, one
Yeah.
person.
And speaking of that, because you've mentioned the term a couple of times, uh, and I just want your take on the importance of a mentor or coach that's really good, knows the stuff, and can pass down strategies, information, techniques, systems to you. How important do you think that is?
I think it's everything, and I almost want to call them. There's two kinds of mentors. I mean, there's I think sort of soft mentors and hard mentors, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and the
I get
soft
it.
mentors are the ones that are just helping you along and saying, well, are you sure you want to get out, and that kind of thing. And the
Yeah,
hard mentors are, that's a bad decision. You need to go to a different job.
yeah,
That so or when and mentors at every level.
yeah,
The people when you go into a new job, and the mentor doesn't, people seem to think, at least here, it seems to me, everybody seems to think they have to have this super important mentor. it has to be somebody at the top. It has to be
Mm.
somebody who's gone everywhere. And I don't agree with that. I think it's just anybody can be a mentor. You know, they can be less important than you.
Yeah.
But you know, it is important if they have walked the walk and know some of the steps and can help
Yeah.
you. But it's you should have mentors, or not you, but people should have mentors
Yeah.
at different levels. It's because people
And
at the
it's,
top don't have the time all the
yeah.
time.
And it's like Mr. and Mrs. Miyagi come in all shapes and sizes, don't they?
Exactly. Yes. Yes. That's a great way to put it. And your parents, right? Or
Yeah.
relatives, brothers, sisters, you know, husbands, you know, wives. I mean, there's everything. But
Yeah,
the
because sometimes it's just that little nudge, you can do that. And
Mhm.
then other times is where they can give a little bit more instructional. Have you thought about this? What about this? Look at it this way. And then so someone who's walked the walk and talks the talk as well and just does it, they're
Yeah.
they're just different levels, aren't they?
And I think there's, you know, importance when people talk about mentoring. Too many people look at it as a one-way street. Okay,
Yeah,
Joe, I want you to be my mentor, and I want you to tell me everything I should do right, right? And but that's not it. You know, it's the mentee has a responsibility too.
yeah, you're dead
So
right.
if you spend your hour telling me what, you know, all these things that I should do, and I say thank you and just walk away and never do anything, that's to me that's pretty irresponsible as a mentee. I've just wasted your time. You know,
Yeah,
if I, you know, even if I don't agree with the advice, I think it's the responsibility of that person to come back to that person and say, Joe, I listened to what you had to say, but my heart's just not into it. You
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
I can't go that direction. Or if it has something to do with, let's say, finances or something, so I'm just not in a position to do that right now. You know,
Yeah.
but I appreciate it. I'm going to put it away, and you know, hopefully, maybe I can come back to you someday, and we can talk about this again. But so anyhow, that's
Yeah,
pretty
no,
off
but
topic.
that's really good because while you were saying that, what sprung to mind was that you got to take action, and even if your feedback is the equivalent of I don't like that, it's still taking action because you've given feedback. Like
Mhm.
it's like the Pathfinder program that I've written and some other books, and I know you write loads, which we're going to come on to shortly.
Mhm.
I give a money back guarantee, 12 months to the Pathfinder if it doesn't have a result for you.
Mhm.
The one proviso is to get that money back guarantee, you got to send me the completed Pathfinders to show me you've done the work
Mhm.
and you've answered the questions and it's still not helped you. Then, yeah, I'll give you your money back, no problems. But if you send me back an empty Pathfinder, you're not taking action. Does that make sense?
It's like I set that up for you.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, and like some of the stuff you do, I mean, I'm really looking forward to getting there. We're not leaving yet because quite a bit of other stuff happened, which I'm really looking forward to you sharing. Because you worked in intelligence, and right, I know where you worked. Just give us an idea in the locations that you worked, and not what you did, but sort of what you were doing in
Mhm.
genetic.
Sure. Yeah, and I, you know, there's all different types of intelligence, and what my degree, when I mentioned that degree, and it was at the Defense Intelligence Agency. It's now called the National Intelligence University, and it was in strategic intelligence. So, which is kind of you know, like up here, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, it's not the tactical on the ground, and so that was my degree, and I specialized in counterintelligence and so in counterterrorism. So, uh, but I went from there out to the Joint Intelligence Center Pacific in Hawaii, and actually the first person that I worked for there was a British Army guy.
Right, okay.
Funny enough, I was thinking about that today. How many cross sections there are with me and the UK. So yeah, so I was, again, like I said, I write and I was analytical, and then so I was a China analyst at the time, and I didn't really know all that much about China, but he was, gave me all these things to read, and I had interviews with people, and I studied things, and was reading current intelligence and talking to people on the watch, and it was very interesting. And he gave me a couple of papers to write, and I started writing, and so it was fun. And I was like, okay, this is great. And I was there for about 2 weeks. And the head Navy person came into me and said, like, hey, we need to talk. And so he said, we can't waste you down here. We need you on the watch floor, right? That's, every intelligence organization has a large watch floor. And so the watch floors are 24/7. So you're on these crazy shifts where you're working days and nights and mids and Saturdays and Sundays and holidays. And so I said, okay, well, the party was over. But the reality is I learned so much in that environment because it's current intelligence, it's coming in, you're reading things. So I'd started as a China analyst, and I was a Southeast Asia analyst, so learning everything about that. And then I became a South Asia analyst, so my area was expanding. And but then one thing I did, because we had this daily intelligence bulletin that came out every day, and we would get this call from the Hill, because that was our higher command. And the gentleman, who turned out to be a mentor of mine, by the way, he would come on, and they had the Zoom back in there before it was Zoom. They called,
okay.
I forget what they called it. We called them face phones. They were like Jetson phones, just like this, just like we're talking. But anyhow, he called down to the person who was in charge of the watch captain, and would say, page 2 of the div, you spelled Vietnam wrong, page 4 of the div, this and that. He'd go through it, oh, and everybody'd sit there and go, oh no. And this guy was pretty scary. He had been sort of one of the pre-SEALs in the Vietnam,
right.
Vietnam for the U.S. And but he was a Navy intelligence guy, Naval Intelligence Liaison Officer, and that's not classified.
Right.
But anyhow, he was big tough guy, and so everybody
he must have seen a bit then, really.
Yes, he did. So he understood the difference in a coordinate that's off by one number, or a map that's wrong on a slide. So all these things. So that's what he was very, very particular. So I went up to the watch captain and I said, I was an English major, and I'm pretty good at the details and editing and things. And I said I edited a magazine for a year, which I did at the Navy Recruiting Command. And so he said, okay, you got it. So every day, I mean, I still did my job, but then before they finished it, they'd give me this thing, and I'd go through it with a fine-tooth comb and make all the corrections. And there was less of the mistakes, right? So anyhow, they because of that, one of the guys who was in charge of the watch captain said, who is that person? And he nominated me for a job up at the higher command. And it was working for that guy, and I said, I didn't have much of a say in it. It was another watch floor at the time. So I did, it was just a different one. It was actually a little more exciting because it was in the command, like you probably know, a command center watch floor. So it wasn't just the intelligence people, it was all the operational people. And then I was up there, and here I am. I'm the lieutenant. I'm briefing the 3-star General Christmas,
because then you're working with different sections, and you can see what's going on live and how it interacts with each other, and the different strategies you have to use to bring it all together.
Yeah, and hearing from the war fighters, well, that's useless information to me, right? It's great that you think it's interesting, but it doesn't tell me anything, that kind of thing. And that you learn that way. That's how you learn. Nobody was ever mean. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it was very helpful because I was very junior.
And so, if you just hang on there before you carry on, because one of the common factors I found when I do these podcasts, right, is a lot of the stuff, or at least some of the stuff, we just gloss over, right, because it's just a story and we don't realize the significance. My job during our chat is to actually identify hey, hold on a minute. So what you did was you volunteered or you recognized something wasn't quite right, i.e., the grammar,
Mhm.
the English that was being used, spelling, then you took the opportunity to say, "Hey, I can do that," and I'll bail you out of the deep brown sticky stuff to save this two-star general or whatever rank he was, who is an ex-SEAL or
Mhm.
before the SEALs and been in Vietnam, and I'll make sure that at least he's going to reprimand us less than what he is doing currently. So then you stepped up, did that, and as a consequence of that, you got, whether it was promoted or not, you got promoted to a position which was a higher grade.
Mhm.
And the reason I bring this out is because a lot of times people don't step up when there's an obvious opportunity to step up, which could quite easily lead to getting further up the rung. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. From there, I ended up from being on that watch position, that same person, he was actually a Navy captain, but a position came open in their front office. It was a deputy executive assistant working for the two-star Air Force
All right.
general.
Okay. Yeah.
That he said, "Hey, I think you should apply for this job." I said, "Well, actually, I'm okay right here." Because I liked what I was doing at this point. Yes, the hours were crazy, but I really liked working with all the. And he said, I don't think you get it." So I ended up. I interviewed for it, and I got the job, and so I stayed there. I ended up finishing out my tour there the rest of the time, and again working in a two-star office as a lieutenant. You really learn a lot, and
Yeah. Yeah.
again learn a lot about those kind of things. Say, okay, this might not be a popular thing to bring up, but I have to say, hey, and sending back all these packages to people and saying, come on, you can do better than this. This is coming up for a two-star signature,
Yeah.
yeah. So, but it was great, and I ended up working for that two-star Air Force general, and then another one-star Army admiral who replaced him, who ended up being one of my mentors for still to this day. So it all worked out, all because of the dib.
Wow. Well done. Yeah. Fantastic. So at this point, then life's starting to change a little bit, isn't it? And so how do things develop then? What's going on next?
Well, about this time, it was the 90s by then, and they had this big change in the US Navy where now women could serve on combatant ships and in combatant aircraft. So this was a sea change for us because it opened up doors and we could do the same jobs. And before that, the intelligence community really, we were not, you just couldn't do the equivalent jobs of the men. They had jobs that they called equivalents, but we didn't feel they were equivalent.
Right.
So I had an opportunity from leaving there in Hawaii, and I went to serve in the air wing on the USS Abraham Lincoln. So I went to a platform that was a reconnaissance plane that flew off of aircraft carriers, and that was very exciting. And there was one East Coast. Remember, I said those two coast navies.
Yeah.
There was
Yeah.
one East Coast ship aircraft carrier that was the first to take women, and I was on the West Coast carrier that was the first to take women on an actual deployment and cruise and all that.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, so it was of course, since we're sort of conversational and funny here, I was on the Abraham Lincoln and they called it the Babraham Lincoln. And so it
Oh,
was, you know,
babe.
but it was a very it was an exciting time. It was a hard time because it was everything's new, right?
Yeah.
And doing everything for the first time. And there was, a lot of the women, it was their first time at sea. There were some that had been on ships before for like who had been in supply ships and that kind of thing. But for the majority, this was your first at sea experiences. And so, it was an integration of women and aviation. And this was right after the unfortunate tailhook incident in the US where a lot of women were harassed. It was
Yeah.
eyesore. It was just a terrible, terrible time in our naval history. and there was still repercussions of that were going on at this time. So it was a challenging time, but it was also probably, one of the most exciting times to
Yeah.
be part of something that big. So
Without wanting, I mean, obviously, I don't want to stay in that time for too long because we got more things, more important things to talk about. Before we leave it though, I just want to, I'd like an idea on how the women in general dealt with the backlash and whatever sort of undercurrent was going on.
different people dealt with it in different ways. That the ones that I felt, and this is me, just me speaking, not the Navy.
Yeah, yeah,
The ones I think who had bared the brunt of it were actually the female carrier aviators, because it was, they're the ones that were part of the aviation community that this whole tailhook piece belonged to.
yeah,
Uh, I and a lot of them just were very, very strong. I mean, they had to be very strong to get there,
yeah,
and they had to know that they had to prove themselves, and they had to fight for everything they had. They also knew that they had to get along with their teammates, that
yeah, yeah, yeah,
that it couldn't be an us and them. And so it was very, I was in the air wing, so I was close to them. We lived down together. I mean, I knew a lot of what was going on, but I wasn't the one flying off a carrier every day and being judged on my landing and having, so it was, they are the ones who really had to toe the line the hardest.
yeah,
And they did wonderful. I mean, think about it. They just had a woman commanding officer of the Abraham Lincoln. So it's, talk about, you've come a long way, baby. That really is that in that
yeah.
time frame, that if you think about it, it's really not that long
No,
but so it was another kind of rough, rocky road, but everybody did their best and tried to make it a better place for the next people who came in,
yeah, because
and yeah.
yeah, because I'm just thinking like I'm just thinking about how it would have processed. Like if a female pilot does a bad landing, or if a male does, they say, "Oh, what did you do there, mate? You could have gone off the edge, you numpty, or you idiot," in national international language.
Yeah.
But if a female would have done it, I mean, it could have been looked at completely differently, couldn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and there was some unfortunate incidents at the time, and there was some um, things that happened. They that where they were, people were clearly making it harder for the women, like, even in a teasing way, making it
Yeah, yeah,
harder
yeah,
for them than they were for the men. And again, it had to be some of those people who would come in with like you said, who to come in and instead of trying to spin up the situation, try to maybe de-escalate the
yeah,
situations.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Good.
but
Well, I get the gist of that. So it wasn't a great time. So now what we're going to do, we're going to move on to more positive because I think we can part that, can't we?
mhm.
So yeah, so you've experienced this, and it's been a rocky road again for more than just you, for quite a few people. So what did that teach you, and what was your next step?
Well, my next step, I ended up going to work in aviation. It was called Air Forces Pacific. So they were, it's hard to explain, but they're in charge of all the aircraft carriers and aviation units on the West Coast,
Right.
well, in the Pacific. And so again, that was more of it wasn't as tactical, wasn't down on the ground, but it was up here. And as you said, more policy and systems and that kind of thing.
Mm.
And because of that, I ended up going out on the carriers as an inspector with the teams that were going out. It was part of our process for getting carriers ready, both from their systems to make sure they're up, and also for the people, for their exercises to help get them to the next level. And so I got to do that, and it was very, very eye-opening. It's a happy end to the story, to the last story, that it really wasn't that terrible. I'm just making it out to be a little worse than it was. It was worse for other people than me. Let's put it that
Yeah,
way.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but when I went those next 2 years in that job, and I went out to all the carriers, that I was just astounded by the time, I went out to the next carrier and the next carrier, and how much things had changed. So how much people had learned
Oh, wow.
with that integration of the women, and instead of putting them all in a little cubby hole down here where they're all away from everybody else and it's quiet, that they spread them throughout the ship just like the men were, and
Yeah.
just small things like that, and people have become just much more accepting. So again, it's steps, right? Steps in the right direction. So I did all that, and I really I loved that job. I had some good times there. I learned a ton, and but I left there and went to Washington D.C. Went back to Washington D.C. Um, to work for the same admiral that I'd worked for out in Hawaii, to be his deputy executive assistant again in the front office of the Navy staff in the Pentagon. And
Wow.
again, it's a lot of people don't really care for Pentagon duty, but you can't learn more.
No, I mean,
So I learned a lot in those couple of years. It was helpful that I had worked for him before, and I knew a lot of things. Of course, but in the time that I was in that job, he was only there for so many months, and then another person came in, and then he left. And so it was like three people there in the year and a half that I was there, and learned something from every one of them. And I left that job. And again, this is one of these ones where I was talking about how somebody says to you, that mentor, I wanted to go to a job at the CIA, and he said, talk to the person who's there. He knew who was there. He said, talk to the person who's there. If you still want to go to that job, okay. Because he was sort of the head person who decides who goes where,
yeah.
right? And so I said, okay. So I talked to the guy, and I swear I couldn't see him, but I swear he had his feet on the desk and was smoking a cigar. I don't even know. He said, "Oh, this job's so easy. You'll love it." And I just said, "Oh," I said, "Now I got to go back to my mentor and tell him he was right." And he said, I went back. I said, "You're right. Okay, I don't want to do that." And I said, and he said, "Well, how about this? I have an idea for you." Okay. He said, "How about if you go to the Office of Legislative Affairs?" And I said, "I'm an '04, lieutenant commander." I said, that guy there he's an '06. He's a Navy captain." He said, "Yeah, but that's okay. You can do the job. I know you can do the job." And I was like, "Yeah, but what will anybody else think?" And in the office, office there,
Yeah,
they expecting an '06, not an '04. And anyhow, I went there, and I didn't know much about it. I was not very into politics. I'd never been into politics. I had to interview for the job, and I went there, and the person who was interviewing me said something like, "Well, who's your senator?" I said, "I don't know."
yeah.
And he said, "Wow, you really are a politician." I said, "No, I'm not. I'm moving around. I'm in the Navy." And so and the thing is, they wanted people who were not in it for the politics.
Right.
They didn't want a Navy person who was going to come in just to get that time in the seat and learn the ropes and meet people, and then get out and go work on the Hill. That's what they. So I got the job, and I had it for 2 years, and it was fascinating. I learned so much about how things work in Capitol Hill here. And also I got to travel all over the world. I mean, Egypt, Israel, the Middle East. I've been to the Middle East
Every-
before, but just all over the world, places I never thought I would have been, and take all these congressmen and their staffers, and to go to shipyards, and go to christenings, and go to but just a lot of it mostly was investigative work, was what the people were doing. So
yeah.
and about intelligence actions. So it was fascinating, and a really great 2 years.
And I suppose that's true testament to the phrase, honesty is the best policy. You're asked the question and you're thinking, how should I answer this? And you just like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And that got you the job, really, because
Mhm.
it showed that you were unblemished
Mhm.
by political persuasion or anything in that respect. So, what was going on in at this time when you were at Washington D.C. and you were traveling the world? What was going on the more personal side for you at this time, and how was that making you think about the future?
Mhm. Well, my mother and father still they were divorced at this point, but they both lived here in the area, and so I wanted to be here. That's one of the reasons I wanted to be here. Uh, I actually thought my mother's health was failing, which it was, but it turned out when I was here, my father's health failed miserably, and
Oh,
during
I'm
this
sorry.
time, during that tour, he passed away. But I was so glad I could be here, and then I was here for this last couple of years of his life to be with him. So I was very focused on family at the time. And I was not married, and I was very busy. I mean, when I said I traveled, I was traveling like 3 weeks out of a month, so I didn't really have a lot of time for that much of a social life. But
Yeah.
I ended up after that, I left and went to the Army War College for a year and got another master's degree. They needed to put me somewhere because in my community and intelligence, you had to screen to be able to go to be a senior person on a senior sea duty position because there were only so many, right?
Yeah.
And so I had screened for sea duty, but the job wasn't open yet because again, even though this is a couple years later, they still only have so many positions for women on ships because of the berthing and whatever. So they needed to do something with me. So I went up to the Army War College and got another degree. Had a wonderful time, enjoyed it. It was one of the best years ever, except for that's when 9/11 happened.
Right.
So that was kind of, shocking. And so anyhow, spent that year at the War College. Took that year to really recharge my batteries because they were pretty depleted after everything that I've set up to now. And
Yeah.
so I ended up uh, going to another ship. I went to Third Fleet Staff in San Diego on the USS Coronado. It was a wonderful time, and I ended up meeting my husband there.
Right.
So we ended up getting together and getting married, and we've been married since. So there was a happy ending to that story.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well done. Now, I just want to, that incident which you mentioned, that changed the world, didn't it?
Mhm.
Especially for Americans. And working in the intelligence unit, how did that put fire in the belly? Without going into any
Yeah, no.
sensitive information, how did that put fire in the belly to want to? Because wouldn't it be great, right, if we could eradicate all of the extremists, all of the nutters, all of the terrorists. And I
Mhm,
mean, that's what our joint intelligence units do.
mhm.
And I joined the military to serve, really. So, how did that make members of the military that you got the gist of? How did it make you feel at that time? Because that was a big sea change, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was very hard because I had just left the Pentagon, and remember, everybody thinks of the Twin Towers, but there was also, the Pentagon got
Yeah,
hit,
yeah,
and I lost. In particular, uh, people in naval intelligence and also in defense intelligence, people I knew, people
yeah.
I'd known for years. And so that was very hard. And it really, you talk about that fire in the belly, it makes you really want to fight back more. So at first, of course, I was angry that I was at the Army War College and I couldn't do anything, right?
Mm,
And
yeah,
I asked to let me go, and they wouldn't, they couldn't, they just said it's just the way it was. And I said, okay. But then when I got out to Third Fleet, it was good to have that fire in the belly because what what happened is all of a sudden we were in the war, right? And so we had to get where the schedule used to be, let's say we had to get two carriers ready a year for put them through exercises and the
yeah.
different phases of exercises and all that, and that bumped up to, okay, we're going to get five, and
Wow.
it was actually more. What happened is they wanted more carriers, and they started having us train the amphibious readiness groups, so taking the large big deck ships that
Yeah.
carry mostly Marines and giving them much more capabilities, including more intelligence capabilities. So we had to rewrite exercises because the exercises we had been using weren't counterterrorism exercises. And so
Mm,
I had to rewrite exercises, had to really bump up what we were doing, had to just change the total way we did business. And so that you really would feel like okay, well, we're doing something here.
Yeah, yeah,
We're doing something here. And then from there, I was there for 2 years, and then I ended up from there going to the Joint Intelligence Task Force combating terrorism. So, and that was where I really felt like, okay, finally, I can help make a difference here.
yeah, yeah,
And that I was there for 3 years. I had again great bosses. I had had a mentor there, one of my women mentors who I'd known for years, known back from the DIB days, back
yeah.
at Chick back. And so, but it was a really interesting time. I had very interesting jobs, and I had teams and places that were doing real important work. And so I don't know what the right word is to say, but it was satisfying, I guess.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And rewarding, I suppose.
And it what? Oh yeah,
Rewarding.
yes, rewarding. That's probably a better word. Yes, it's
Yeah, yeah. Well,
yeah.
satisfying, rewarding. Yeah, I mean,
Hmm.
it's all of
Yeah.
those things, and I suppose when, like, when you go from a situation of not knowing to knowing,
Hmm.
and then knowing more than what you did when you started, that's sort of the progression of development, isn't it?
Hmm. Yeah.
And I think during our chat, that's what we've seen throughout. You start off as, well, as in the officer corps doing your training because you were going to be a Marine first of all,
Mhm.
and whether you go up the ordinary ranks or the uh, officer route, to me, you're still in the military serving. What what I can see is how you've just got to be prepared all the time to step up, be
Mhm.
ready, and always take action. And when you've got an opportunity, just seize it, haven't you?
Mhm. Yeah. And that particular organization was, everybody, one of there's a quote from somebody recently. I wrote a story about this recently, and she said it was like a startup. It was a business, small business startup, because yeah, we had a whole new problems, and we had to look for whatever ways we could to fight them. And we would come up with ideas and say, people could look at you in a meeting and say, there might be something to that, or that's the craziest idea I ever heard, but you
Yeah.
had to do it. You just couldn't sit back and not take a chance, because because the consequences were real and big. And so
Mm.
it was a great time. So it was a great time to be there. And also, just we had the best, most talented young people who just came in from everywhere after 9/11, from Georgetown and all the big universities, and all of these people that could have gone to much better jobs than working at the Defense Intelligence Agency. Not that there's anything wrong, but what I mean is they could have gone anywhere, but they wanted to be in the fight, and they wanted to do it. I had people there, they wanted to deploy and deploy and deploy. And it was an exciting time.
So, what year are we now, and what was going on, and like when did you feel the tide started turning?
You mean for counterterrorism?
Yeah, and
Uh,
then also your military career and what was going on, and
yeah.
because you'd already decided to leave years prior,
Yeah, yeah,
and then you got persuaded to stay in because
yeah.
there's other stuff you can do than what you're doing currently. So what was going on then? Were you thinking, what's next?
I was thinking at that point, I was a commander at that point. So, and I just said, you know what? If I make captain, okay. If I don't, that's fine too. I've done more than I ever thought I was going to do, and that's the way I felt about it. And that was, and but I did make captain, and so that was that was good, and I was happy about
Congratulations.
it. Thank you. And and then so after I was in that job at GFCT, sometimes everything's not always cut and dry, right? So now that I'm a captain, I ended up going to another job over on the Joint Chiefs of Staff for another person I had worked for before. And so I was worked in Joint Chiefs of Staff for intelligence for a year, and it was a big job. It was a very big job, but I wasn't happy because I was happy with the job. I was happy with the people. I missed what I had been doing in the last job that I felt was so important and so relevant. And so
Mm.
it was just a different, different. I mean, it was important, right? You're up at the top levels, but it was different. So anyhow, so I was there for a year, and then I had decided, okay, this I'm going to get out at this point. So I needed to stay for a couple of years, but then the boss I was working for in the Joint Staff, he was going to be the director of naval intelligence on the Navy staff. They had just made this a 3-star job for the
Right.
first time. So he said, okay, well, I want you to come with me. So I did, because we knew each other, right? But yeah, so I went there, and then my last job was on the Navy intelligence staff again. And then I was in charge of all the people things, right? So it was
Yeah.
but it was civilians and and military, and officer and enlisted, and so and he was a real mover and shaker and wanted to do many things in a short period of time. And so again, it was a very exciting time, and it was a changing time, but just keeping up with it all. But yeah, but at the end of my 3-year commitment to being a captain, that's when I got out. So it was just time.
And
I felt it was time.
and thank you for that. I mean, I can reading between the lines. I see your job as extremely important because you probably kept a lot of people out the deep brown sticky stuff, if you get my drift. But
I like to think so,
yeah,
but yeah.
and by checking stuff out. So that was fantastic. What I would like to know, because often we can put rose tinted glasses on stuff. And as I said earlier, we skim over things and we say, oh, yeah, I did that. Oh, and this happened and then that. How do you deal with failure?
Get back up and not make the same mistake again. I mean, that's really it. Figure out what went wrong, and make a point to,
Yeah.
put that in the head and not do it.
So
And also,
when that punch of failure smacks you square in the face, how do you deal with that?
think about it, learn from it, and move on. And I try not to let small failures get me down. I can't, you can't let it paralyze you.
Yeah.
There's silly things. You said I write books, right? And my second book came out, and it had like typos in it. It was I had a publisher, but it had more typos in it than I than I would have liked. I mean, that may seem like something very small, but when you're putting your words and your face and your name out there for the world, and there's mistakes like that. And at the time I had started my business, which is veteran writing services. So if you have a business that is saying you can help people's writing and there's typos, that's a big, that's a big issue. And so of course I was horrified, right? But I learned from it and said, you know what? Yeah, I can blame it on them, but really it's me. The buck stops here. And so what did I do? I went back and said, okay, we need to fix this. We need to make it right. And I owned it. I told people I had copies. And I'd say, hey, there, give that back to me. Here's a here's a
Yeah.
good
Well,
copy. But
and I've got to raise my hand at this point because you, as a great proofreader, because we met through LinkedIn and you picked up one of my books. And he said, "Hey Joe, can you take feedback?" Or words to that fact. And I said, "Yeah, of course I can. Feedback's the food of champions, isn't it?" He said, "Well, okay, big boy. On page 4 in your Pathfinder book, there's a bit of a typo, and there is, yeah. And I've got to take ownership of it because that's what it is. And I know you were not doing it to come across as the big I am. You
mm,
wanted to be helpful, didn't you?"
yeah,
And
yep,
I believe that if feedback is constructive and it's not destructive, it's got to be great, hasn't it?
yeah. Yeah. So I mean, that's just one example. But like I said, I just didn't let that paralyze me. I didn't let it say,
Mm.
okay, I'm never writing a book again. I'm never writing anything. You know, just said like, okay, live and learn. Let's move on. You know, so you kind of have to do that. So
And speaking of that now, because you decided that you wanted to get out, how did that transition go? Because that's one of the things I like to look at, how the transition from the military to Civvy Street went for you. Because I know that different military pairs have different experiences.
yeah, I mine was pretty easy because I was married, but I didn't have children, you know, didn't have small children to have to worry about for paying for school or anything. So I have
Yeah,
my husband was previously married and he has two grown kids. So that and they're wonderful, you know. But so I didn't have some of those things that other people had. I had a pension. I didn't have to move. I didn't have so many of the problems that so many other people
yeah,
had. And like I said, I got out because I was tired. And so I wasn't ready to rush back into something. As a matter of fact, my plan was just to goof off, have fun, ride my horses, and enjoy life. I just bought a new project horse, a young horse that I'd never been ridden, and so that was going to be my focus. And read books and write some more, and just well, write some. I didn't know that I was really going to write as much as I did. Uh, but then I ended up, I worked for one old boss and I worked for another old boss. And then a friend asked me about this. She said, hey, you want to go to this women's entrepreneur program for veterans? And I said, I don't know anything about it. And so I did. And I ended up taking my book writing and the kind of work that I've been doing for different people in the writing field and putting that all together into a business. And so I ended up starting a business in 2014. Now, I had actually been doing that work since like 2009, 10, but I just plunked it all together and put some structure to it. And I still have the business today. I'm still working in it. And over the years, I've learned how to, again, you learn from failures, you learn from from successes, you learn from what I've learned is, boy, something I think we all learned way back when is, you know, follow your gut. If something's
yeah,
telling you, if you're somebody's coming to you about a client, about a potential client, and just something doesn't feel right about there's probably something not right about it. And I'm not saying that there's something wrong with that person, that somehow it may be just a bad
yeah,
fit for
yeah,
you. So yeah, so that's that. My transition was relatively easy. I wouldn't say easy. I did do a lot of work and studying and things to try to make this business right. And I, you know, made some mistakes along the way, but I just didn't have to go through a lot of the things that some people do. I stayed involved with veterans groups and
yeah,
you know, both writing groups and also just, you know, the DAV, American Legion, and I'm the vice president of the Military Writers Society of America. I wasn't all along, but you know,
yeah.
that's
Wow.
where I am now. So I'm still sort of in the veterans circle. So I never felt like I completely lost my
Yeah,
husband's a veteran. I mean,
yeah, yeah.
I never lost that whole, you know, group.
Yeah, and you mentioned quickly about the horses. Tell me a bit more about that because that's quite interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have I had three horses, now down to one now, but the first one, when I was going out to buy that project horse, the lady who was bred him said her daughter was very sad that he was going to be going away, even though he was just a year, you know, a little over a year, and nobody had ever ridden him, but she just had a connection to him. And I said, well, tell her Lucky is going. That was his name. And tell her Lucky is going to Washington, D.C. to go be a senator. And she said, oh, that's such a cute idea for a book, you know, like a children's book. So anyhow, I ended up thinking about it and I didn't really want to write that book, but I did want to write a book. And I thought about it and I was very into the unwanted horse problem at the time,
Yeah,
and which is still out there. But I decided to write a book to highlight that. And I started looking around at books and I wanted to write about a military family because there were almost no books about them then, very few. There's a lot more now, which is another good thing. But so I started, I think, okay, I'll show you. This is the first book, was
yeah. Please do.
Believing in Horses, right?
Wow.
And that's Lucky on the cover. And
Oh,
yeah, on the eye, that's actually a little picture of my
oh,
mother.
beautiful.
Yeah. So that's him. And this book is very much about sort of, it's about him and it's about me. And even though I'm the little girl, it's the little girl going through these things of how challenging a young horse can be. But she ends up finding these horses that she needs to rescue. And so when I was done with that one, I wasn't done. So I wrote this book, Believing in Horses 2. And this
Ah,
is,
right, TOO as
yeah,
well. Believe in horses as well. Yeah,
yeah,
right.
yeah. And that one's about her getting into helping with therapeutic riding. And then the third one, because I wasn't done, is Believing in Horses Out West. And this,
Right. Wow.
this young girl, she goes out to check on one of the horses that ended up at a dude ranch in Montana. And my husband and I have done a lot of ranches and things. So this is based kind of on some true stories, but they're all positive stories trying to get people to believe in themselves, and particularly their young adult books and trying to get, young people to believe in themselves and their causes. So that's been a kind of a labor of love. So
That's absolutely fantastic because I can I can just feel how passionate you are about it. Definitely. I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit more about that in a second. Before I do, I would like to get your opinion on one one top tip, maybe two, one top tip you would give to somebody leaving the military or a veteran who's already out of the military, or just someone who's not been in the military and just wants a good tip on how to get on in life, in business. What's your
I would
strongest tip?
say keep your options open. Really keep your options open. And uh, if one road doesn't work out, there's many other roads out there. And for instance, when I left, you heard what my plan was, just goof off and do nothing. But this writing thing came along and I said, hey, that's okay. Maybe I'll do that. I hadn't thought about doing that. A business came along and I said, okay, well, maybe I'll start a business. And so I would say, just very much keep your eyes and ears open. And when somebody says something, don't automatically dismiss it. Really give it some thought and think about the pros and cons and consider how, we don't always see ourselves in in little pegs and holes that maybe we can fit into, but we have not been put there, so we don't see ourselves there.
Yeah,
So that would be my top tip.
thank you. That's an excellent tip. So keep your options open. And how valuable and transferable do you think the skills you learn in the military are to Civvy Street?
Unreplaceable, the discipline, and I used to say this too when I'd hire people, when I have hired people, and I say, I know if they were in the military that they got up and they went to work that day. They went to work. They didn't call out sick, because they didn't feel like being there. And
Yeah,
so that, yeah, that itself, it doesn't sound like a skill, but also negotiation, getting along. We can't always pick our teams, right? So we have to get in
yeah,
there and
you're
work
right. You're
together,
right there. Yeah,
make things happen, and we don't always pick our jobs, right? So you have to figure out how to make it work, and usually we're a little under resourced, so you have to figure out how to make it work with what you have. So yeah, very transferable. You know I could go on and on, but
fantastic. Thank you. And you, Valerie, you are the Chief Executive Officer. Great title, well deserved, of Veterans Writing Services. What's the mission of Veterans Writing Services and how are you getting on with it?
very simply, I try to help clients meet their goals. So if it's somebody's trying to encourage people to buy something, I try to help them put it into words it's very helpful if they're all spelled right and put together in the right
Yeah, yeah.
order. So I've worked in a lot of, like, I've done a lot of studies and analysis and white papers and proposals, and helped with reports, again, a lot of editing and that kind of thing, just to help people put their best foot forward. So and I'm getting along with it. Like I said, I've been in business for 14 years now. I've learned at this point what I do and don't want to do, and also what I'm trying to scale down to, and how much I want to be working, where that that skill took a while. especially coming out of the military when you don't really have the chance to say, I don't want to do that.
That's interesting, actually, because that triggered something for me. How important is it to recognize what you don't want to do as much as what you do want to do?
It's very important because if you don't want to do it, you're not going to do it as well as something you want to do. Now,
Mm,
that doesn't mean you can't just not do anything you don't want to do, but
yeah,
and maybe, for instance, when I was building my business, I had to do some of that work that I didn't want to do because I needed to build a base, right? And I needed to work with other people and meet other clients because about most of my business, maybe 90% of it has all been, except for my book selling business, but most of my writing business has been a client referrals.
yeah,
So, and you have to, you better, even if you don't like what you're doing, do it well.
yeah.
Yeah, but then recognize it. So the next time somebody says, "Hey, you want to do this?" and you say, "Not really," or I've got, or look at your calendar and say, "I can't fit it in." So,
Yeah. And once you get to a position like, because when I don't know how it goes during your schooling, well, a lot of teachers say work on your weaknesses, and now I say, look, recognize your weaknesses, and if you can, get someone in who can do what you're not good at, because then you're invincible. Because that's what we do in the military, isn't it?
yeah, yeah,
I mean, we wouldn't send the army in to help captain a ship because
right.
we'd probably crash it pretty quickly, right?
Yeah, yep, yes.
So yeah, that's what I love. So, how can people get in touch with you, and what is next for you? What's coming next, and how can people get in touch?
Okay. People can get in touch with me by my email is ceo@veteranwritingservices.com. And I have the website at the same address, and you can see actually my what I do, and also there's a link to my books on there. So that's how they can get in touch with me. Please do. We're welcome to talk to anyone. And what's next for me is, like I said, I'm very active with Military Writers Society of America, so that takes up a lot of my time. And even though that's my nonprofit, that's free work, but it's very much what I want to do. And what we are doing in that space is trying to help all these veterans tell their stories, just like what you're
Yeah,
doing here, Joe.
yeah, thank
So,
you.
except we don't have a podcast, but we do it with books, and we have book awards, and we have a magazine that we let people write for, and we have anthologies. And so we really want to encourage. We know there's so many stories out there that are untold. And this is not just for Americans, by the way. It
No,
just happens to be the name of the organization, but our bylaws have it so we can allow other people to be in. But what's next for me is I am writing 2 chapters for a naval intelligence history project, one on naval intelligence in Vietnam and another on foreign spies. And I am also working on my first historical fiction novel loosely based on my family, my Irish immigrant side of my family. It came over to New York and lived through Prohibition and World War I and World War II, uh, and just it's their kind of history in a fictional setting that's going to be interesting.
and prohibition was a challenging time, so I bet you that's got some interesting research for you.
Yeah, it does. And I had there's family legends about part of the family being involved with some things in New York that will make it very interesting. That's what gave me the spark for the story. And then I started thinking about some other things too. But if I can say one thing that I haven't had a chance to say.
Yeah, please do.
Okay. I want to make a shout out to my British American mother. Today would have been her 90th birthday. So
Oh wow.
it's, yeah, August 20th. And so she was a fantastic woman. You would have rather talked to her than me, but
No,
she,
as well as you, as well as you.
yeah, she was not in the military, but she just had an amazing life. You think about these people who are 90 years old and what they have gone through in their lives.
Yeah.
And she was a wonderful mentor and always very, very supportive. And anyhow, I thought it was interesting that this podcast happened to be on her birthday, and she's no longer with us, from 3 years ago, but she would have loved to have watched it. So
Oh well, thank you for sharing that. And I do believe that we are here and we learn by standing on the shoulder of the giants that went before us.
Yes, yes.
Definitely.
Couldn't agree more.
And one last thing, because you haven't mentioned a particular date, which is quite significant in what you're doing at the minute, 2032. Tell me about that, please.
That's the Naval Intelligence History Project, and that's the 150th anniversary of naval intelligence.
That's absolutely brilliant. Val Ormond, thank you for your service. Thank you very much for your time and sharing your vast amount of knowledge, experience, and wisdom with us today. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Joe. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. JoeTeams.com is a resource I have created to fulfill my mission to help 1 million veterans and business entrepreneurs like you achieve the goals, dreams, and aspirations they deserve. JoeTeams.com is jam-packed full of valuable resources specifically designed to help you on your journey to success. Visit JoeTeams.com now to find out how you can join and start your journey to success immediately. That's JoeTeams.com, JoeTeams, JoeTeams.com. And until we meet again, have a brilliant day.